Welcome to the Digital Planning Podcast. This series is designed to educate individuals about all things digital in connection with estate planning, business planning, and estate administration. To keep up with all things digital, please subscribe at iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, or wherever you download your podcasts. And now, Jennifer Ziegel, a partner at Kleinbart LLC, Ross Bruck, a principal of Estate Genie, and Justin Brown, a partner at Pepper Hamilton LLP, with today's topic.
Welcome to the Digital Planning Podcast. This is Justin, and I'm here with my hosts, Jen and Ross. And today we have Bruce Kane, who is the founder of Inheritance Data. Inheritance Data is the UK's asset searching platform, which is designed to explore the records of financial institutions to establish a decedent's individual's financial history during the estate administration process. Bruce, we are so happy for you to be here. And welcome to the Digital Planning Podcast. So first off, Bruce, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thank you. I started life way back working as a salesman for Xerox, selling folding and inserting machines, and then moved on to various other Xerox products. Working my way up to, in the 90s, a senior sales director of a large corporation, running several call centres with hundreds of people in each. And then in 2000, there was a merger between my large company and another large company. And as you all know, there's no such thing as a merger. It's actually a takeover. It depends which gang you're in. And I was in the wrong gang, and I got made redundant in 2000. I then went through sort of 10 years of trying to get back into it, but my age was wrong, and so everybody wanted my skill set, but just didn't really want to pay the money. Oh, in 2004, my parents died within 6 months of each other, and I realised I knew nothing about my father's history. There'd been a bust-up with his father, my grandfather, who I never met. So I decided to teach myself genealogy and found I was very, very good at it. Then in 2010, I decided to become an heir hunter. There was some big opportunities here in the UK. There's a thing called the Bonavencantia list, which is where everybody that dies intestate, all their details are put there. The money is held by the government legal department, and anybody can go and trace the beneficiaries, which is what I did. We built a company that was the largest heir hunting operation by volume. We were doing 10 to 20 a week. We always knew it was going to come to an end. So that's really my background, bringing me all the way to now. With an heir hunter, you're paid by a percentage of the estate value. So we built a search engine to maximise our percentage that we could pull out of an estate.
How did you become interested in technology and the estate administration process?
Being an heir hunter, I became administrator of hundreds, if not thousands, of estates. And I saw the whole process from being given just a name, then we have to build a financial picture of that person. We then have to go to all the financial institutions to drag that money in. We then have to go through, or during that process, we have to go to the courts. And we saw what an antiquated process it was. Everybody wanting bits of paper. The financial institutions, we discovered, were sitting on tens, if not hundreds of billions of pounds of what they called gonaways, where they'd lost touch with their client or deceased. So we started probing quite heavily, and at that point we had to start building from scratch, because there was nothing on the marketplace, a method of communicating with every single financial institution in the UK. We built an engine that was suitable for us. Also, it gathered all the information. Everything was in one place. the downturn in our marketplace came probably 5 years ago, when everybody else started coming in, and also we lifted all the big money out of the Bonaventure list. And so we started turning our attention to what other assets had we got. Having built the search engine, we then started thinking, well, everybody that's doing probate for a company or for a person really needs to be making sure they've got everything. And I'd already discovered that my father, when he died in 2004, where we thought we knew absolutely everything about him, we found, when I did a search on him, I found another £16,000 tucked in a Deutsche Bank account. Why he put it there, I have no idea. And when you start talking to people, most people have what I call a rainy day bank account. So we started really looking at how we could expand the search engine and drill in. As I said, the financial institutions are still quite archaic here, and they really didn't want to release this information because you have to remember in 2007, 2008, there was the financial crash, and I believe a lot of the lost money that I referred to, which is tens, if not hundreds of billions of pounds, was being used within their organisations. So the idea of losing that was a bit of an anathema to them. So we then started really honing down our searching skills. So in this country, in the UK, we have a thing called GDPR, General Data Protection Regulation, which they all started hiding behind and saying they couldn't release any information. So we then started saying, look, all we actually want to know is there an account? And at that moment they said, no, we can't tell you if there's an account. So we said, have you got any form of trace of this person? So we just asked for, have you got a trace of this person on your files? And it is a sheer yes or no. So that's how we started to turn the search engine. So that was the outbound. Then we started talking to administrators and probate professionals and asking them for their input on how they wanted it. And we found, once again, to our surprise, that a lot of the solicitors here and lawyers were very not used to using online tools within their business. So we had to build a front end that was very, very simplistic, easy to use, upload documents, download, everything they needed. So that was really where we got to with the technology, and we spent the last 2 years ago we started really fine-tuning it. A year ago we said, that's it, there's going to be no more changes. And April 2018 we went live from our beta site, we went live, and for the last year we've been really pushing it, and there's been a huge uptake.
Bruce, a lot of the probate process in the UK sounds like it overlaps with our process here in the United States, but there's obviously some unique elements that we don't share. And I was hoping you could talk a little bit more about just the role of the heir hunter, and I think you described it and the process involved, but we simply don't have an equivalent process here. Often it is the job of, if there is a will, the job of the executor, or if there's not a will, the job of what we call the administrator, to work with the estate and to search for assets. But beyond that, there's not a publicly available process like this heir hunter. Can you just describe that a little bit more in terms of who are these individuals full time. That's what they're spending their entire profession on. And is this process that you described of reaching out to financial institutions and searching for assets, this is commonplace, but as of when you started the process, it was not an automated and sounded very difficult. So I'm comparing that to what I'm familiar with of trying to find statements of accounts or emails or look through the decedent's information to try to figure out where assets might be, but it's really a needle in a haystack type operation.
Thank you for that. The air hunter operation does happen in the US. Also, it's where somebody has died intestate and nobody steps forward to look after. So there's no relatives, no immediate family, no will. In this country, the government steps in and takes that money and utilises it, and it ends up with the Duchy of Lancaster after 12 years, which is the Prince Charles. In the US, as I understand it, if an asset is dormant for 2, 3, 5, 7 years, depending on which state, the state itself comes in and takes that asset, uses the assets, and it is still available to the general public to claim back, but there are several sites that advertise it, same as the Bonavencantia list in the UK. At this point, anybody that's good at genealogy, tracing people can pick it up, find the beneficiaries, and then in this country there was no means of once you had control. So you've taken control of the estate. You apply to the court, having got the beneficiaries who then act as the personal representatives. That is then gives the heir hunter the power to go to other financial institutions and say, have you got anything? Now, what we found was that was fine in the early days, but it sort of wound down. And we then found that there were huge piles of money that weren't registered anywhere. So we then became to decide to work for people that actually had probate or were seeking probate to ensure that their estates were fully maximised. You used the phrase a needle in a haystack. That's exactly what it was like in the UK. We sat down and just built a complete list of every financial institution. Then we looked underneath to find all the pension funds. So, for instance, in this country, we have the largest pension fund in the UK is Phoenix Group. That underneath it has 350, 500 companies that it's purchased over the last 10 years, maybe more. I don't know. But each one of those companies that's underneath also has been purchasing companies. So you have this huge pyramid of just in one place. Because that company is so large, they have then split their operational centres into 6. So, and they don't interact in searches. So you have to search each one of them. So we're back to that needle in a haystack. It's just you have to build a tree that covers every single source and where people paid in, because what you're doing is you're looking at where money was paid into pension funds, for instance, back in the 50s, 60s, 70s, maybe even earlier. You've got banks that have got old bank accounts that people have forgotten about. Shares are a classic one where people have, up until the invention of the computer, you had to have the share certificate that then ties back to the register that is held by a company which now you have Computer Share, Link, and various other companies that handle them. So it's a massive thing, and it is very, very easy to lose track, especially now with an aging population. And with age unfortunately, it brings dementia, where people lose touch, and it's how early that the relatives get in and secure all the documentation. And also you've got people like my father who for some reason just decided to create a bank account and put £16,000 in it. He and my mother also took out policies when all my children were born. They took out savings accounts and paid in every year, as well as their birthday, they paid into that account. And fortunately, we got control of those very early on after my parents' death. We found the certificates and were able to pursue it. But there's once again billions of pounds tucked away in that. So that's why we've moved away from the heir hunting and no longer do that. And we are totally supporting probate professionals in hunting for the missing assets, and virtually every single probate case will have something missing.
So, Bruce, could you tell us a little bit about exactly how Inheritance Data partners with probate professionals and how one would actually get started with a search through Inheritance Data?
Of course. We have as I said, we designed something as simple as it could be to use. So if you go to the inheritancedata.com website, there's a button there that just says register. Any probate professional, lawyer, whatever, can go, press that button and register the company. We then run, or the admin team then run a check. It goes into a holding pen. We then just check that they are in actual fact a probate professional. We know who they are and they are bona fide. We then open the gate, and that company can then join as many of their people into the company, so that if you've got a large probate department, all the practitioners can log on and it's all seen as one company's work. Then they can place their searches by filling all the details in. It asks for the name of the deceased, addresses of the deceased. And when I say the addresses, a lot of the time somebody will die in a care home or a hospital, but they've probably been through several other transitions. So they started off in their working life, then they got married, that's 2 different homes. Then you have the family home, which is where the bulk of the financial transactions will have taken place, in my experience. Then there is the family will leave and they decide to downsize. Then you move to the care home and then to the hospital. So we suck in all of those different addresses, because any one of those could be where the money resided. We also, at the same time, we've got aliases. So in this country, John can also be Jack, Frederick is Fred, Elizabeth is Betty. So all of these aliases can also be put in. We also take the date of birth, obviously, and the date of death. What companies do they work for? Because a lot of the time there's company policies, which so you can put in as many work companies and their addresses to see. We have over here what's called a national insurance number. I'm sure you have the same thing, which is a unique identifier as well. We also have a box that the professional can put in any known or suspected accounts. So it could be that one of the beneficiaries said, well, I remember taking my auntie to an ATM and it was a such and such type ATM, so therefore belongs to that sort of financial institution. So we would then take that information. So we run the normal search, which means we then, we ask for the death certificate to be uploaded and the power of attorney or an authorization letter to be uploaded as well. So we then, once that is all loaded and our admin team are happy that everything is correct, it then gets broadcast. That gets broadcast to 200 financial institutions, which equates to 350 databases. The reason for the difference is that some of the financial institutions will have multiple operating bases, and the operating bases don't link. So we will go to, if a company has 3 operating bases, they will each get contacted. And as we've been building our system, some financial institutions insist on letters being sent to them so that they can respond by letter. Others require emails so they can respond by email. There's APIs. There's some require telephone conversations, and we also have online portals that they can come in and use.
Bruce, there's really no uniformity as to how to get the information or what each institution requires from you or the executor in order to obtain this information.
Correct. They make it incredibly hard to get this information. And as I said, what we found in the UK was to bypass all of this resistance, was to say, we just want to know if you've got a trace of this person on your system, and we just want a yes or a no. Then once we've got a yes or a no, then that information turns up in the online reports, and the probate professional then knows that at such and such a financial institution there is a trace. It might be historic, might be current, might be dormant. One doesn't know, but it has to be followed up. But you're quite right. There is no uniformity. We deal with every single. Over the 2 years, we built up what gets rejected and what gets accepted.
So, how long does this process take? How long does it take from the time that you get the information and input it into your system and then reach out to all the financial institutions and then they get back to you? What is that time frame?
From receipt, we aim to broadcast within 24 hours or 1 working day. We then start receiving results immediately. If it's an API, it's immediate. If it's a portal, it tends to be within 24 hours. So the online report that the probate professional can see starts getting populated virtually immediately. We find that at 28 days, the bulk of the results are in, and our software looks and it analyzes whether we've got to chase anything else down. So we've got, for instance, there's the 7 big banks and building societies. So if we haven't had a result from any of those, we do another hit. Also, we've got links such as if they hold a Lloyds bank account, they will almost certainly possibly have a pension with Scottish Widows, because it's part of the same group and it was pushed back in the day by Lloyds Bank to sell into its good customers. So we will then make sure that we've got an answer from Scottish Widows. At 28 days, that's the bulk of it. We archive at 50 days, which is when we consider that you will have all of the results. We will have checked in our software, make sure that it's happy and that there's the right number. Then after 50 days, the reason for archiving is so that the probate professionals' screens aren't cluttered with old searches. It gets archived, but it's still able to pull it down. If we get a result after the 50 days, the system automatically sends an email to the person that raised that search saying there was another result came in. So, but that is very, very rare. So that's the time frames.
Bruce, you mentioned reference to an insurance number. Is that the equivalent of a Social Security number in the United States?
It's exactly the same, yes. I'm sorry, I couldn't think what the phrase was in the US. It's meant to be unique. It's meant to be used by everybody, so that you should be able to just search on that number. But what we found in the UK is that the pension funds back 10 years ago purely worked on name and address. And another thing is they didn't use date of birth. The question was, how old are you? So they then just have an approximate date of you. So, if you're born in, you could be a year adrift. So all these unique tools that were designed to be used for this very purpose, we found that the financial institutions have managed not to use in the past. They are becoming better nowadays. So you've got unique things like the date of birth, but still our national insurance number is not heavily used. For instance, banks don't ask for it. Pension funds do because it's tying to how you pay your taxes and what have you. But it's not unique. I don't know how it works in the US.
In the UK, is it a number that is assigned at birth, or is it a number that is only issued when the individual engages in certain financial transactions?
You're given the national insurance number at birth. It takes you through its main one is ties to the national health system. That's the main use of it, is the national health system. You have to have a national insurance number to get treatment.
Bruce, when inheritance data receives the information from the institution of the existence of an account, what information does it actually receive? Does it receive just a straight yes or no that there is an account, or does it receive account information? And I guess where I'm going with this is, what kind of privacy issues arise in obtaining this information for deceased individuals?
We receive back, our question is there a match or no match, i.e. a yes or a no? So in the very basics, we get nothing, no match. We will then, in some cases, we will just be told, yes, there's a match, but we will then be able to identify that to the address that was sent to. So we can actually supply a contact address or an email address or whatever that is associated with that yes. And in a lot of the cases, they'll give a reference number. But everybody, despite there being very little data protection for a deceased person, they still regard it as data protection, so they just won't give any more information. And there are some that will give us the entire, how much it was, what it is, the whole 9 yards, as they say. So we get every single result.
Bruce, can you talk a little bit about the process you had to go through to build some of those APIs and enlist the help of those financial institutions? That seems like one of the most daunting tasks that you had to go through in order to establish this.
Right back 5 years ago when we started this project, we trawled all through Google and produced a list. We then started writing to the list, and if we could find an email address, we'd send the email. In the early days, the responses were really hit and miss. We then started tightening it up, and then as it became our full-time, we realised it was going to be a full-time occupation. We really started to hone it down, and we put a team together that just went after finding out what department they had to go through. We discovered that virtually every organisation has a bereavement team. So once you start actually saying, where is your bereavement team? So we just keep hammering away, and we get telephone numbers. The telephone numbers would say, write to us. So over a period of a year, we actually managed to tighten it right up and got how they were communicating. Then as our volume started to come, and right in the early days, we developed a portal so that a financial institution could just log into our system, see all the searches, and answer yes or no, put in any extra details, and there was very, very little uptake on that. Even if we got to a bereavement team that said, yes, we want to use it, compliance or the IT department used to say, well, it still does say no. It's a breach of this, it's a breach of that, etc. So we just carried on picking away at it. Then as our volumes rose, some of the better financial institutions decided that to receive a letter, scan it into their system, put it up on the systems, create a case for where in a lot of the cases there is no answer, they haven't got a match. It was a waste of time. So they asked to come onto our portal. So we started moving them onto the portal. Then one of the large operations said, well, this is ridiculous. If we're going to use a portal, we might as well go the full distance and integrate into our system. So we then jointly developed an API to drop into their systems. But what we've discovered is with the API that the financial institutions, as they've grown and evolved, they actually haven't got rid of any of the old computer systems. They keep them running because the cost of changing the software to move it onto their main platform is too costly. So all of a sudden you're not talking about one API, you're talking about 50 APIs into different systems. Some of these systems are running on COBOL, and some of the very old languages. So the portal is becoming the preferred route as against an API. So that was, we were chipping away at that. Then with the coronavirus issue, the change, we've already seen the change where there's a lot of outsourcing now, people working from home where they can't access the main systems. So we're actually getting requests now to go onto the portal. So we believe that we will see an acceleration of use of the portal, getting away from paper transactions.
Bruce, in connection with that kind of new trend that you're seeing, does inheritance data search for a person's digital assets?
Yes, the digital assets, whilst they're regarded as digital assets, all of the digital companies have a physical base to operate out of. So we contact the physical base. If these assets are UK based, we've got things like First Direct, various banks are now totally, there is no branches of these banks. So we've located where their bereavement departments are and got addresses for them, and we communicate directly with them that way. Digital assets such as cryptocurrencies we can do nothing with, because nobody. That's a problem that's going to unfold over the coming years, because even if you locate, nobody actually knows who's got assets and who hasn't. There's no actual register to search. That is the feedback we're getting.
Sure. What about websites or domain names that the person?
At the moment, we don't search for domain names or websites. We're purely looking for cash or physical assets that have a physical value, as against things that are transient.
What about like airline miles that might be tied to a credit card?
We are currently trying to. We're working with a large financial PLC that has contacts over a wide variety. So we're starting to deal with them to introduce us to utility companies where you're prepaying for you've got a standing direct debit, just paying it out. In a lot of cases over here in the UK, you find the electricity bill or the gas bill, actually you're so far in credit at the end. So we're over the next year, we will be searching for those. And I have to say, I hadn't thought of air miles. I've just written that down for us to have a look at.
Well, excellent. I look forward to hearing about how you develop and building that out on your platform.
Thank you. It's we're trying to evolve, and we started with the big stuff to start with, and then as we're expanding, all these others are coming to light. And you see, as I said, it's the utilities that we're going after currently. I actually have conversations scheduled to bring those in, and air miles, etc. That I'm sure there's others similar to that when I sit down and think about it or talk it through with the team, we'll find that there's a block of others that we could set a team up to actually start investigating, searching those as well.
Bruce, does inheritance data just look for assets, or does it also look for liabilities?
We've got inheritance data search engine purely looks for assets, but it does pick up some if there's an overdraft, if there's a credit card outstanding, it gets highlighted. But its primary role is for assets, not liabilities. We've just hooked up with another company that is designed and built a search engine utilizing the credit reference agencies over here that actually searches for liabilities. So we're going to be putting that as a button on our website within the next probably 6 months.
Bruce, do you have any stories or client searches that you've done that have yielded a significant amount of unclaimed assets?
Yeah, we have recently been working with a large financial institution where they had dropped a very significant amount of money into what's called the Court Funds Office, which is paid it to the state because it was just sitting on their books. And we've been looking at that and saying whilst we're working for probate professionals, we're also uncovering that we're missing if if I'd missed my grandfather's assets, it becomes disjointed, it's broken. So what we're building is a thing called Lost Account Finder, which will be free to the consumer to type in not only all their details, all the details that you would use for a search for inheritance data, but you put that same data in for your parents, your grandparents, and your great-grandparents. And then you run that database will be run against the databases held by the financial institutions where it's old money, where they know it's not been touched. It dates back to the 50s or 60s, so most of those people will be deceased. And we're building another side to inheritance data where the Lost Account Finder will deal with those. And just in recent times, we've reunited £10 million just in the last 6 months, where these assets have been lying dormant and nobody knew they existed. It goes back to bits of paper that used to be in existence, share certificates, bank accounts. Everything used to be paper back in the 50s and 60s and early 70s. That's where there is a huge amount of money just sitting lost.
With a database that's publicly available like that, as well as your other search criteria and availability, do you have concerns about privacy and how that is managed, and both for decedents and in case any living individuals' information can be accessed?
I have a great deal of concerns for personal data, and that we take it extremely highly, and everything that we build has as many defences in as we can put in. Password protection, encryption. We don't store any known assets in a database that is accessible by the internet. So even if all the systems got hacked, you can't tie the money with people. So no one can say they won't get hacked, but I like to think that we are a pretty secure company.
And Bruce, do you know of any U.S. entities who are doing the same thing that you are in a similar capacity, or is this pretty unique throughout the world?
When I first started developing this engine, I didn't know of any competitor because we were building it for us, not for anybody else. It was only when I started marketing it, I discovered that there was one other company in the UK that was doing it. They developed it in the 90s and had spent no more money on it. So it really is not an online. It's very manual, and every time we come to compete, we seem to lift the client. I looked at the States, US, and searched, and I can find nothing that does what we do. So I am currently trying to find a partner because I'm going to need one because it's a massive project. But we're getting such good results here in the UK. One just feels that with 10 times you've got 10 times the population of us. You've got 10 times the problem.
Absolutely. Justin, why don't you go ahead with your line of next questions?
Yeah, I was going to ask Bruce, as technology changes and improves, and as with the coronavirus and people are working more remotely, how do you think that what you do at Inheritance Data will change and evolve?
We are seeing already the effects of coronavirus, where large organisations are starting to look at how they operate. Processes that were developed back in the 80s and 90s that have just come through as, well, that's how we've always done it, so we'll carry on doing it that way, are now being very rapidly assessed. For instance, this whole handling paper, we must have paper, we can't accept it digitally, is now being, literally in the last few days, people are looking at it and going, this is ridiculous, why are we having this huge mailroom when we could handle it? The front end of our business is totally digital, and the back end is something back in the 80s and 90s. So I think inheritance data will change in its response platform from the FIs dramatically over the next 6 months, and we will then be able to offer a far faster, where I'm saying at the moment, majority of results in 28 days. I can see that coming down very quickly, which will speed up the ability of the probate professional to apply for probate because they know where everything is much, much quicker, and allow the release of, the bereaved families get released much, much quicker, and the process is much smoother. Also, I believe the cost of our search will drop once everybody's stopped using paper, stopped using emails, and actually just use the digital approach. I don't think we'll expand it much more in APIs for the very reasons I spoke about earlier, that everybody's running on old systems at the background, and the cost of doing it will be prohibitive. So it's much easier to have one person doing a search physically across 20 computer systems and just then ticking a box on a screen. That's cheaper than writing 20, 50 APIs. So that's really what I see coming over very, very quickly. I thought it would take years, but I think we will see it within 6 months.
Bruce, are you working on any other interesting projects right now?
Yes, I'm working on a lost account finder, which is allowing the general public to look for assets that weren't necessarily with their parents, which is where we're searching at the moment, but it's money that goes back to their grandparents, their great-grandparents. Over here in the UK, in published figures, there's £1.1 billion sitting in lost bank accounts. There's £3 billion in the published accounts of the National Savings and Investments Corporation, and there's £16 billion in 11 pension funds that have been declared to what we call the Financial Conduct Authority, which I believe to be the same as your SEC. So we can see £20 billion worth of money that people are struggling to claim because it's from their parents, grandparents, etc. So we're building a search engine that will allow people to input all the data that we input with for inheritance data, but for their parents and grandparents and ascendants. And this database will then be compared against the database of the £20 billion I've just outlined. But if you roll those figures out, that £20 billion actually becomes nearer 200 billion to 300 billion pounds. And in the US, you will have exactly the same problem, but you're probably actually up in the trillions of money that is just been lost along the way.
In the United States, after a certain period of time, and each state is a bit different, any unclaimed property, any lost bank accounts, anything that is dormant for an extensive period of time, and we're talking many, many years, will ultimately then a sheet to the state, and the state will take those funds into their coffers. It doesn't seem like there's quite as similar timelines if this search database is pulling grandparents' accounts who presumably, might have passed over 10 years ago. Is there any timeline that at a certain point those unclaimed assets and dormant accounts would become property of the United Kingdom?
Back in 2007, 2008, there was the Dormant Building Societies and Banks Act that said that the timeline for a bank or a building society was 15 years of dormancy. Then that has to be transferred to the Reclaim Fund Limited, which then is meant to hand that out to charity, not to the government. The problem with that is that it was discovered that the banks and the building societies that are pushing that money in aren't doing much to actually do any tracing of it prior to giving it to the Reclaim Fund Limited. The money can still be claimed by the individual, but all that the requirement of the bank or the building society is that they write to the last known address, which of course is 15 years ago. And in that case, they probably were dead before the start of the 15 years. So this 1.1 billion has arrived. Now, I know that they've been trying to roll this out. We have what's called the Dormant Asset Commission that has been trying to roll this 15-year dormancy period across all the financial institutions. And the big argument is over the word dormant and the time period. So you can do it for banks and building societies because that's very straightforward. For investment schemes, when is it dormant? Because you can put the money in there and you're putting it in there as an investment and it just churns over and accrues investment, it's moved around. Pension funds, you take a pension out when you're 20, they don't have to get in touch with you till you're 55, which is when that pension comes to fruition, or is going to come into fruition when you're 60 or 65. So therefore, there's no dormant period because it's, that's how it was written. And I might be wrong here and I stand corrected, but I think you've got the same thing in the States where the banks and building societies you can scoop it out of, assets you can scoop it out of, share dividends you can scoop it, but pensions, which is the real massive one, you can't because you haven't got a dormant period until you get to the end when you can say, okay, it's X number of years after that person was 65, you can then say, all right, it should have been paid out when they were 65. So when ergo they were 70, if it's a 5-year dormancy period, you can then grab that money, which is very similar to what happens in Australia. But you've still got all those people that have died between 20 and 65, where that money is sitting there totally dormant. And also, the records I've found in a lot of these financial institutions are not as slick as they make out.
Bruce, how can our listeners get in contact with you to learn more about inheritance?
I would welcome, my email address is bruce@inheritanceData.com and my office number is 0044 163 673 250. Or alternatively, go to the website and use the info box and it will come in to me as well via my admin team. Thank you very much.
Well, Bruce, on behalf of my co-hosts, Jen and Justin, I'd like to thank you very much for joining us today. This was Bruce Kane, Founding Director of Inheritance Data, and we really appreciate your time. Look forward to our next episode of the Digital Planning Podcast.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Digital Planning Podcast, the podcast designed to educate individuals about all things digital in connection with estate planning, business planning, and estate administration. Please subscribe to this podcast and leave us a rating or review at iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, or wherever you download your podcasts. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time.
This podcast is not intended nor should be relied upon as legal advice, nor is it creating any attorney-client relationship with a listener and the hosts or guests. The information provided is only for educational and informational purposes, and the information provided will likely change.